Hi students, it's Dr. Perks. I hope that you're all doing as well as you can be. We have our interviewing lesson today. I won't always do PowerPoint lessons, but this one is just so full of advice that I think it was important to keep it in this format. So for job interviewing, here's our agenda. It is in chronological order. So how do you prepare? What do you pack? What do you bring? We'll cover attire, and then the nonverbals and verbals during the interview itself, the follow up. And then at the end, I do summarize some video and phone interview advice, but I also put a lot of video advice throughout. So here we go, thinking about how to prepare. We did discuss part of this in class, that it's important to do research about the company. One of our students mentioned that she didn't have an answer to a question related to company values or kind of what they're up to. So it's important to dig into some of this research. If possible, research the person that you know you're going to meet. If they don't tell you who you're actually going to meet with, sometimes a human resources rep will set up the interview. It's great to ask. And you can also connect with that person either before or after the interview on LinkedIn. Katie Fell always recommends connecting before because you're showing that you're doing your research on that person. It's not stalkerish, it's a sign of preparation. When I have this bullet point of know your target audience, what I mean there is certain people have stronger decision making power. You should always be nice and polite and professional to everyone. But if you have knowledge of who's actually making the hiring decision, maybe do a little bit more research on them. Maybe think about what they might like to hear in your answers. For an in person interview, especially in Boston or a big city, knowing where the interview is and actually practicing driving there at the time when you'd be doing the interview is really important. Being late can mean that you don't get the job. And so it also is really stressful to worry about being late or to encounter unexpected traffic. That's a positive, I would say, of doing a video chat interview. You have the technology hiccup, but you don't have to deal with traffic. So just be over prepared so you're not compounding your anxiety on an interview day. In terms of the video interviews, have a friend or a family member test the technology with you and use headphones if possible. That usually minimizes feedback, especially if there are a lot of people on the interview. It's important to have a quiet and professional space that's already set up. Um, I've noted for our class, please don't worry about pets and family members during this challenging time we're going through. But if you had a real job interview, try to keep them isolated or out. The next point about practicing your responses, we're going to spend some time on that, but absolutely, be prepared. You have a sense of some of the standard questions, so iron out some answers to that. It's not enough, I would say, to lay out or pick out an outfit. Definitely try those clothes on. Make sure you feel comfortable in them, especially if it's a full day interview. For the last point on this slide, I know some folks get nervous about eating before an interview, but I've also heard horror stories about people getting nauseous or thinking they were going to pass out because they didn't eat. So do your best to stick with a regular routine and to also stay hydrated. When I say regular routine, I mean, eat a normal thing that you would normally eat for breakfast or lunch or whatever it is. Stay hydrated beforehand and try not to let the nerves lead you to an extra cup of coffee or tea. You don't want to over caffeinate and then be shaky and appear extra nervous. The next slide is about kind of packing a bag and getting those materials ready. A Padfolio is helpful. It's usually a leather or faux leather bound kind of case that has a notebook inside, slots for your resume. It might in the middle or in the binding have a little slot to put a pen. They're great, and the bookstore, I'm pretty sure, does sell them at Merrimack. Not that that helps you now, but you can get them online too. If that isn't something you have, a folder and a notebook could be good. I would have 2 pens, so you've got a backup just in case. And print out copies of your resume and cover letter, but only pass them over if you're asked for them, so you don't have to go shopping them around. If you are in a creative field or you think that portfolio materials would matter, I would definitely have those ready. So you could bring a tablet, which is really helpful to swipe through some of the materials, or if you have the funds for a high quality printing, that's great. I think it's important to bring water. I don't know if I'm a nerd like that, but just staying hydrated, especially when you're talking so much, can be helpful. In terms of the video chat interviews, this advice echoes what I have in the assignment, the modified version, but I would print out your resume and have it next to you. You can even have notes about talking points. I would discourage you from reading from the notes, but if you need to glance at a piece of paper, I think that's totally fine. Have a pen or a pencil handy, and then you can keep water with you. I think it's totally fine to, have a nice water glass or mug or whatever you have nearby. Can show a little personality too if you want. The next slide about how to dress, some of it is very open to interpretation or your unique style. I would say for the more conservative fields, we've talked about this, they might not want to see color on your resume, things like that. If it's a marketing, business, HR oriented field, really think about dressing conservatively. I did have a story from a student who's a graphic designer, and the folks he interviewed with kind of laughed because he was more dressed up than them. But I think it's better to draw that laughter by dressing up than to say you don't get the job because you didn't show up in a professional way. And I have unfortunately also heard that story, or that kind of story. So someone didn't dress up enough. In terms of proper covering, I know it sounds very Victorian, but I know the women are probably not going to wear short skirts. Think about what you deem acceptable. Ask friends and family if you have an outfit that you're like, I don't know if this pencil skirt's too tight or short. Stockings and nylons, they drive me crazy myself, but for an interview, definitely wear those. I think it's helpful you can show personality through your accessories or through like a shirt you're wearing under a blazer, but try not to make it distracting. And with accessories, bracelets or necklaces or jewelry can sometimes be loud and make noise. That could be extra annoying during a video interview. So keep that in mind and maybe even practice a couple of answers in that outfit with those accessories. If you are doing an in-person interview, or even if you're not, wear nice shoes, comfortable shoes, especially if you're doing an in-person interview and you might be walking from office to office or around an organization's large building or campus. Be careful in terms of your personal polish. So, if you're painting your nails, make sure everything looks good. Polish your shoes if you can. And then using a lint brush, that's something I keep in my office because I have cats. So just give yourself a kind of once over with that. In a pinch, duct tape or packing tape can work too. Especially for an in-person interview, a professional bag is important and layers for comfort so you're not distracted by office air conditioning that's way too cold or a heater that's just overdoing it. For a video chat interview, all of this advice is relevant except for really the bag, and the layers for comfort may not matter as much because you know your house or your apartment very well. Next, we have interview nonverbals. So, the solid handshake, I typically practice this in class, so if you want to find a family member or roommate to practice with, that's great. Some of the negative handshakes or the ways you can go wrong, the dead fish is the name given to one that's kind of limp. What you want is a firm handshake, so reach kind of straight out and generally give like a 1, 2, 3 kind of pumps up and down. Some folks, they grip too hard, or some folks hold on too long. You don't want to do that. So just be kind of in the middle of things and practice that. And when I say in the middle, I mean don't grip too lightly, don't grip too hard, don't linger, don't stay there too long. And really practice it. You have time, right? So give that a go. In terms of eye contact, you want to definitely look at the people when you have an in-person interview, especially making sure that you're scanning the room, that you're not just looking at one person, that you're looking at everybody. For the video interview, the best practice is to look into your camera when speaking. But if a person is talking on screen, look at their image on the screen when you're listening. It's super important, even though you're nervous, to look interested. You should nod your head. You should paraphrase what they said when they're asking a question or answering one of your questions. I say show excitement. That doesn't mean you're jumping up and down. It just means you're giving enthusiastic responses that show you are interested in what they're saying and that you are interested in the job, that what they're telling you is something that you're responding well to. Smiling is important. You don't have to overdo it, but those positive nonverbals can go a long way in terms of likability. And once you've made it to the actual interview phase, a lot of people are just trying to determine, would you be an enjoyable or helpful coworker, right? They have a sense that you've got the skills to do the job, but would they like working with you is the next question they're asking. It's important to have good posture to convey confidence. When you're in the in person interview, I encourage you to lean toward the people you're talking with. Instead of leaning back, it's kind of an arrogant pose. We actually had an interviewee last year who did that, just kept leaning back in an office chair, and it was really strange. So if that's all in person, again, lean in, have good posture. In terms of the video interview, good posture is important, but you don't want to lean in because we know that that makes you look kind of creepy and distorted on the camera. In both situations, in person or video, avoid leg shaking. Try not to bite your nails. Think about different fidgets that you might know that you have. I had a professor who would always shake the change in his pocket and it was very noisy. So if that's a fidget you have, take the change out. Don't have any in your pockets. If you're flipping your hair or touching your hair, which I know is a problem I have, I encourage you to pull it back. Don't chew gum, don't do anything else that could be distracting and could take away from your excellent answers. This is really the big one, and our assignment places weight on your answers to the questions and the structure to those answers. The O'Brien Center has the STAR formula, and it's not something that they coined. This is a pretty standard formula for answers. We briefly talked about this in class, so it might sound familiar as well. But for a lot of behavioral interview questions, tell me about a time when you want to use the STAR formula. So first you briefly set up the situation or the task, how you handled it, what action you took. So don't make it seem like an accident that something good happened, and you always want to end on positive results. So tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a customer and how you resolved it. So just to give you an example, I had a customer who came in to the ice cream store that I was working, and she had her dog with her. And it wasn't a service animal, it was just her pet. We are not allowed, because of the health code, to have dogs in the ice cream store. So I asked her to please wait outside, and I went out with her, and I took her order, I prepared it, I brought it out to her, and she was happy. I followed the code, my boss was pleased, and the woman actually wrote a positive recommendation for me on our Google reviews page. So it was positive overall, and I was glad to be able to assist the customer. That wasn't a perfect example. I was kind of working through it on the spot, but you have all this prep time. Be ready to talk about a time when you had conflict with a customer, conflict with a coworker, when you didn't agree with a boss's decision. Tell me about a time when you weren't sure you could get the job done. Always end with something that you ultimately prevailed on. As you answer your questions, and this is something that I always need to work on, and in interviews I write notes on this, speak really clearly and slowly. Especially with a phone or a video chat interview, I think the rushing is a little bit more common in those situations. So make sure that you're seeing if the audience is catching you. If you see them start to lean in toward their devices on a video interview, it might be a sign that they cannot hear you. So stop, kind of correct yourself, cross-check with them that they can hear you. Maintain that eye contact while you're answering. Don't look up to the ceiling. Don't stare at your notes for too long. It's important to take a moment to think. If you have a question that you haven't encountered before, I think it shows some thoughtfulness and care instead of jumping into an answer that might be fast or rambling or kind of weak. So think about it, maybe jot down a note or two, and I think that's the best way to deal with a question that catches you off guard. It's important to always speak with confidence. Don't speak about yourself self-deprecatingly. Always highlight your strengths. I think that's just really important. If you are someone who puts yourself down or has negative self talk, work on that. Work on that in your daily life, and that should also help you in the interview scenario. Make sure you're not doing what the presidential debates show us to do. Make sure you're actually answering the question. In a job interview, if you keep ducking and weaving or pivoting to another question, it's not going to look good for you. So always ask for clarification if you're not sure what they're asking, but do your best to directly answer a question, unless it is an illegal question, which we'll talk about in a future lesson. We've talked throughout the semester about show rather than tell. Always give specific details, stories, scenarios, narratives whenever possible. This makes you seem even more human. This can make you seem personable. It can also help you be memorable. Finally, stay professional with your examples rather than using personal experiences. Just to give you an example, we had interviews for an administrative assistant several years ago. And when asked about budgeting or organizing documents, a candidate kept talking about doing this for her family. Not a family business, but like I budgeted for my aunt and uncle's household, or I organized the different tax paperwork for my family. So you always want to stick with professional examples. And just a reminder, your internships, your club experiences, and your class examples and volunteer work, those are professional. They're not about I don't know, your own Instagram page that's for really cool hairstyles that are, completely unrelated to the job at hand. So stick with professional. So one thing that I've seen is that it's not just students, it's interviewees in general sometimes don't have questions prepared, and that makes you look disinterested in the job. So typically you'll be able to ask 2 to 4 questions. Sometimes it's at the end of the interview. If you have a full day interview, you want to prepare even more questions. If you have a full day interview, you're meeting with a lot of different people, and so you want to think of what to ask them specifically. It's great to bring in your research about the organization or the industry to lead to a question. I see you just became a B Corp. Tell me about what that means to you all. I see that you posted record profits in the third quarter of last year. What do you attribute that success to? So you might kind of do that. It's always important to stay positive and show interest in their answers. So don't just ask a question and rush to another question. And when I say stay positive, that means like if you say, tell me about a typical day in your PR firm, and the answer they give you, you want to respond, oh, that sounds terrible. I would hate sitting in a cubicle and doing that work. You could think that in your head, and I would make a note of it to yourself afterward, but definitely give positive feedback like, wow, okay, I'm excited. I'm even more excited about the job. That's the kind of day-to-day I'd really like in a position. Consider asking about something that came up in the interview. So this is where your notebook or your Padfolio comes in handy. Even if you didn't have a chance to ask questions before, you might keep that kind of running list of things you want to know. And so when they turn it over to you, you have that prepared. You mentioned earlier that Marcia is transitioning out of her role. Do you have a sense of what that position would look like? So is Marcia's role changing? What's going on there? That's just kind of a stupid example, but Marcia's all that came into my mind. So there you go. Don't ask information that's on the website. It shows that you didn't do your homework. So do your best not to memorize everything about the organization, but know some basic things. It's key to not assume you have the offer, you have the job. So just keep that in mind as you frame your questions. Also, the not or don't ask on the not ask list. It's not about you improving yourself on the interview. You are trying to get this job. You're not trying to be in that student mode. Don't ask how you did. Don't say, here's my resume. Do you see anything wrong with it? Also, avoid the salary and benefits question. If you advance in an interview, so maybe you did well in the phone interview, they asked you for an in-person interview, they asked you for another in-person interview. It's possible that you could ask about salary and benefits at that time. But in general, I would stay away from it. get the job first and then see what the offer is. We will talk about negotiations later in the semester. In terms of following up, this is pretty brief, but I prefer an email thank you note because you're sure it can go directly to the person. Mail is okay, but at a big institution like Merrimack, it could get a little lost. And sometimes the job committee or the hiring committee is deciding right away. So you might want to get them the email as soon as possible. Add them on LinkedIn either before or after the interview. And if a lot of time has passed from when they said they'd get back to you, if they say we should have a decision in 2 weeks and it's 3 weeks now, I would follow up. If you don't get the job, always be nice about it. I'm saying this and if people were terribly rude to you and asked illegal questions, do what you're going to do. But in general, I think it's very important to maintain those connections. Just because you weren't the right fit this time doesn't mean you shouldn't apply for other positions at that organization. And it doesn't mean that they didn't like you. You might have just lost out to someone who had more experience or whatever it was. We have had job candidates that we thought were wonderful, and we wanted to hire 2 or 3 people in one go, but we didn't have the funds to do that. So just so you know, there's usually or often positive regard for someone even if they don't give you the job. It's great to thank everyone that you've met, sending them individual emails if you can. If you're meeting 20 people, that's a little tricky, but if you could get cards or write down spellings of names based on what's on the door outside of their office, that would be great. So following up. Finally, so our last slide, thanks for bearing with me now, is a video and phone advice summary. Same kinds of advice for the in-person interviews: dress properly, have the right space, so quiet, professional, uninterrupted. Good internet connection is really helpful. On that note, if you have a spotty connection, always make sure, actually, even if you don't have a bad connection, you never know what could happen, always take down a phone number where you can reach the person you're interviewing with. I think that's really key so you can continue even if a connection is dropped and can't be maintained. You'll see additional pauses after their questions, so just be adaptive to that pace of the conversation. Body language and vocal variety are key, so especially on the phone, try not to sound monotone. Aim to smile because you can actually hear that in someone's voice, even if you can't see it. So just keep all that stuff in mind so that you, I don't want to say jump off the page. That's what you want to do with your resume and cover letter, but they can get a sense of a vibrant personality even on the phone. And then send your thank you relatively quickly. I think the 2 to 24 hours is still pretty solid. To end the video presentation for today and to also give us a form of connection, I'm going to open up a discussion board and I'm telling you here what it's going to be about. So I would love for you to, in our discussion board, post one activity or something that has soothed you during this challenging time. So I'm talking about coronavirus time. And I will just say it's kind of silly, but I've been making friendship bracelets with my kids, and it's very methodical and soothing, and it's bright colors, and I like that. So that's my one example, and maybe we can learn some things from what you've done. So post on that in the discussion board. Thanks for listening along, and thank you to my cats for not meowing during this important video. Take care, everybody.